Continuing bipartisan support for Artemis is essential, but members need confidence in NASA's long-term plan. I hope the Administrator will lay out the detailed cost and schedule for Artemis to help give us that confidence. The Artemis program receives a justifiably large amount of attention, but we should also recognize the tremendous success of the Commercial Crew program. On May 30, the NASA SpaceX team launched American astronauts on American rockets from American soil for the first time since 2011. Commercial Crew represents a true public-private partnership where the government buys services from space companies. It would be helpful if the Administrator would highlight how NASA is implementing lessons learned from Commercial Crew development. In November of last year, this committee passed the NASA Authorization Act, demonstrating strong support for Artemis and Commercial Crew. The legislation also strongly supported NASA's key science priorities: aeronautics research, planetary exploration, STEM education, and other initiatives. Today, Administrator Bridenstine can provide an update on these missions and describe any major impacts on cost, schedule, or operations caused by the pandemic. NASA plays an important role in America's whole-of-government approach to securing the space domain for exploration, science, and commerce. Great power competition in space is a reality. China's space ambitions are well known, and the Chinese Communist Party has devoted enormous resources to military and civil space programs. NASA recently signed a memorandum of understanding with the newly created U.S. Space Force to bolster collaboration on standards and best practices for space operations, scientific research, and planetary defense. Administrator Bridenstine may want to comment on the memorandum of understanding and where he sees opportunities for collaboration with the Space Force. Even with this year's successes, program vulnerabilities remain. As the Artemis program progresses, we should remain vigilant to protect and strengthen international partnerships, particularly those built around the International Space Station and low Earth orbit research. We should ensure that groundbreaking initiatives such as robotic Mars missions and planetary observatories continue making progress. Maintaining focus on Artemis and other missions will require continued support and funding from Congress. So I look forward to today's conversation with the Administrator, and now turn to my dear friend and colleague, the Ranking Member, for her remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the bipartisan leadership on the NASA reauthorization bill. I'm pleased to join you and Senator Cruz and Sinema to author the NASA Authorization Act of 2019. Among other things, this legislation would provide authorization for NASA's human exploration programs, including the lunar lander needed to return humans to the moon. There is agreement between the bill sponsors about how to proceed on the authorization, and I hope the Senate will consider this important bill this year. NASA's recent economic impact analysis shows that in 2019, the agency generated more than $64 billion in economic output, supported more than 312,000 jobs nationwide, and NASA and the space industry, particularly important in the state of Washington, where space activities account for $1.8 billion of our state's economy, with companies like Blue Origin, SpaceX, and Aerojet Rocketdyne. Thousands of Washington jobs are dependent on this growing space industry. I always say there's a reason we have the Space Needle. So 2020 was a significant year for NASA. For the first time in 9 years, NASA astronauts launched to space from the U.S. soil. And for the first time ever, those astronauts launched on a commercial spacecraft, marking the dawn of a new era for NASA. 2021 promises to be an even bigger year for the agency. 2 commercial providers will begin regularly carrying astronauts to the International Space Station. 2021 will also see the first launch of NASA's Space Launch System, which will return astronauts deep space in a few years. I am looking forward to watching Americans exit the lunar lander, which will be built in the state of Washington, and step onto the surface of the moon for the first time in more than 40 years. And I am very enthusiastic about the Artemis program, which will put the first woman on the moon. Now, we need more than just that women's first step. We need women and minorities to be represented at every level of the NASA and space programs. And so I look forward to working with you and the chairman on how we increase the diversity in all our aerospace industry. Given the many new rockets and spacecraft NASA astronauts will fly over the next decade, it's imperative the agency remain committed to safety. Safety must always be the top priority, and in order for that to happen, NASA engineers and program managers must have insight into the design and testing of new spacecraft. A major safety issue for NASA is the threat of orbital debris. Just last week, the space station was forced to maneuver away from a piece of space debris. In February, the committee held a hearing on threats to space, and I called for increased investment in mapping of space of debris and improve space situational awareness. So, Mr. Chairman, I know you are also committed to addressing this threat, and I look forward to working with you on that issue. While NASA's human spaceflight programs are often in the spotlight, the agency's other missions and research are also critical to the country. As I said, in Washington and many Western states, we face an unbelievable threat from devastating wildfires. NASA's satellites provide data that enables disaster management teams to measure the intensity and development of fires as they burn. And I also want to highlight NASA's Space Grant Program. Again, a consortium at the University of Washington is doing tremendous work to engage high school students and undergraduates in these areas of research and study, which I think just helps us get the next generation of workforce. The COVID-19 pandemic has impacted many NASA programs as well as the people who support them, whether they are employees or contractors or researchers. So I look forward to hearing how this committee might work with NASA to keep the program on track while keeping people safely employed. This is a challenge, but obviously we want to keep moving ahead, so we'll look forward to your comments and testimony, Administrator Bridenstine. So thank you for being here today, and again, Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this important hearing.
I think I heard the state of Washington mentioned several times in Senator Cantwell's opening statement. Clearly, I should have mentioned in my opening statement the important role of the state of Mississippi in all of the activities that we have planned, particularly the Stennis Space Center in Hancock County, Mississippi. So at this point, Administrator Bridenstine, we have your prepared statement consisting of 7 pages in small type. We'll enter that into the record at this point, and you are recognized for 5 minutes or so to summarize your statement.
Thank you, Chairman Wicker and Ranking Member Cantwell. It's an honor to be here. I will tell you, I want to start by thanking you for the support we received in the CARES Act, which ultimately enabled us to move forward on some of our very important missions. We call them mission essential functions of NASA. So we needed that personal protective equipment. We needed the ability to make sure that our crews could socially distance and do all of the things necessary to be safe, and the CARES Act was really a part of that, and we thank you for that. So NASA is really up to some really amazing things. The two of you highlighted them very well. Low Earth orbit, we are commercializing very rapidly. We have been underway with commercial resupply now for a number of years, and now we're moving forward with commercial crew, which we are all very, very excited about. Demo 2 is complete. That was a test flight. Here at the end of October, we are going to launch Crew 1. We're going to have a full complement of 4 astronauts, including 1 international partner from Japan. And so this is a very exciting time for the agency as we move rapidly to commercialize space. But it's not just about commercial resupply and commercial crew. We also want commercial space stations themselves eventually. The International Space Station has been an amazing asset for the United States. It still is, and it will be for years to come. But we all know that a day is going to come when it comes to the end of its useful life. And when that happens, we need to have funded the resources necessary to commercialize low Earth orbit for habitation. We want to make sure that in the United States, and with your help, we can ensure that we have no gap in low Earth orbit. We think about Apollo. We had, during the Apollo era, as much as we loved it, it came to an end. And we had a gap of about 8 years before Space Shuttle. And then after Space Shuttle retired, we had another gap of about 8 years before commercial crew. And we want to make sure that there is no gap in low Earth orbit for the United States of America as we transition from the International Space Station to commercial space stations. But as both of you have identified, what's happening in low Earth orbit, as awesome as it is, pales in comparison to what we're going to see when we land the first woman and the next man on the surface of the moon under the Artemis program. We're going to the moon for a lot of really important reasons, but the chief reason to go to the moon is because it accelerates our path to Mars. And we believe it is important for the first person to land on Mars to be an American astronaut, and we want to make sure that when we do go to Mars, we go with our international partners. This is about American leadership. And of course, what we just saw, in fact, yesterday, Japan announced its biggest budget for its space agency in its history. In fact, it was a 50% increase over the previous year. That is a massive increase for a nation like Japan, and they're focusing it on the Artemis program. They are focused on supporting us as we lead the world to the moon. I will say that that is not unique, though. We've seen budgets coming from Europe that are also increasing, commensurate with the Artemis program and NASA's budget. So a lot of really exciting things in the future. And of course, I'm grateful to you, Chairman Wicker, and Ranking Member Cantwell for the continued bipartisan support for these important missions for our country. So with that, sir, I'll yield back whatever time I have remaining, and certainly open to any questions.
Well, thank you very, very much. You recently announced that the Artemis 1 mission will take place at the end of November of next year. Part of the role of my home state of Mississippi is in these testing the Space Launch System rocket engine. How is the Green Run testing at Stennis progressing, and do you have a target date for the full duration hot fire test?
Yes, sir. So the Green Run testing is progressing very well. The rocket, this is the core stage of the SLS rocket. It is proving itself to be an extremely capable system. We still have a good bit of testing in front of us, including the full Green Run where we fire all 4 RS-25 engines at the same time. So that's going to be an amazing sight to see. Likely to happen in November, and so we're moving rapidly towards that. We've had some challenges, of course, with some hurricanes. We've had some other challenges with COVID, but we've also had some successes, and so we're moving forward. And we think that the Green Run test will be done in November, early November, and we also believe that this sets us up for the first launch of the SLS system with an Orion crew capsule in November of 2021. And so we're moving rapidly towards that.
You think we're still on track to meet that November 2021 date?
As of right now, yes, sir, we are. There are challenges for sure, and depending on how COVID affects us in the months ahead, it could be more challenging. But I will say, because this is a mission that is so unique, we do have margin in the schedule. We have reserve in the schedule and in the cost. And NASA does that for all of its missions. And as of this point, we have not determined that we need to move off of the November date of next year.
Well, I've been very impressed with how NASA has moved forward on in any number of target dates. Let me ask you about the continuing resolution. We're passing a continuing resolution this week, and obviously that's never ideal, but the COVID-19 pandemic pretty much dictated that. This is a brief CR, doesn't carry on into next year. You have spoken about the problem of a long-term continuing resolution. If you will, please discuss the broader impacts of if we can't get our job done in November and December, what that would mean for your programs.
Yes, sir. So the hardest part right now is that human landing system. That human landing system is what right now we're not funded to develop in its entirety. We are funded through what we call the base period. We've got the resources to go through basically February of 2021. And so between now and February of 2021, I think we're okay. But if we get to February of 2021 without an appropriation, that's going to really put the brakes on our ability to achieve a moon landing by as early as 2024. And so it's important to get these appropriations. I will also tell you, sir, the sooner we get the appropriations, the higher the probability of success. So we're very grateful that I know that the House and the Senate are moving towards a CR rather than a shutdown. We're very grateful for that. And I speak for the entire NASA workforce when I say that. But I will also say that the sooner we can get an appropriation, the higher the probability of success to the moon landing as soon as 2024.
That's the appropriation. What about the authorization bill? How important is it to pass an updated authorization bill?
So, in my view, very important. I was an authorizer in the House of Representatives, and I can tell you what the authorization bill enables me to do as the administrator is demonstrate that this has strong bipartisan support that is lasting. Appropriations are 1 year in nature, and they give us what we need to fund the programs. But an authorization bill, this is a fundamental question I get everywhere I go as the NASA administrator. People ask me, how do you ensure that this program doesn't get canceled? Like, NASA has had a history of seeing programs get developed and then canceled. And the answer is we need the authorization bill that codifies that what we're doing has broad national consensus and bipartisan support. I think we're there, but putting that into law really would be meaningful for the agency.
Thank you very much, Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Bridenstine, one of the things that we hear a lot about as, again, we change and innovate is the skill level of the workforce in STEM. We work very hard on STEM education in the state of Washington and certainly want to work on it on a national perspective. So want to hear your thoughts on what else we need to be doing. What does that skills gap look like? And also interested in NASA's X-plane flight demonstration program for a transonic truss brace wing. One of the things we're very interested obviously in is composites and continuing to the development of composite manufacturing. So want to understand what you think we should be doing on that kind of technology for the future as well.
Yes, very, very good questions. And I'll tell you, the transonic truss-braced wing has me very excited about the future of aviation. When we think about the value of NASA to the United States of America, a lot of people, they think about space and the moon and Mars and robotic exploration of the solar system. But the aeronautics piece is probably the most impact to the American economy because this is a major export for the country. And we've been leading here for so many generations. Of course, we had the challenge with the MAX 8. We've had the challenge now with COVID. And when we think about aeronautics, it's kind of, right now it's being stressed significantly. But I think we have to, as a nation, take this opportunity and lead. And when I say lead, that transonic truss-braced wing is a key to that leadership. We're talking about increasing what we call the aspect ratio of a wing, making it longer and thinner. The big thing that does is it reduces what we call induced drag, which is the drag you get from the lift created by the aircraft. Basically, it spreads out the amount of downward thrust that you get from the wing. It does increase what we call parasitic drag from the wing, but that parasitic drag is less than the induced drag. And so overall, you get a much more efficient aircraft. It drives down the amount of fuel that you have to use. It drives down the amount of carbon emissions. It drives down the cost to the airlines. The challenge with that high aspect ratio wing, the challenge with that is that it becomes really long and thin, and so it doesn't have the structure necessary to hold up, a large body aircraft. So I'm a huge proponent of that. We've been advocating, for that inside not just the agency, but inside the administration in general, and we're getting some traction on it. And any support that you can provide would be fantastic. Let's see what your first.
Just STEM. Well, STEM and so
STEM.
in this case, this is a composite issue, right? And so we need more composite R&D and more
Yes, sir.
understanding of then on the composite manufacturing side.
Yes. So this is again very important when it comes to STEM. We need that next generation workforce, and so we've got to be inspiring people at a young age. I think the best thing NASA can do for encouraging people to go into STEM is inspire them and do these stunning missions like landing the first woman on the moon and those kind of activities. We're also very involved at the mission directorate level in funding programs like FIRST Robotics, which is a capability that gets high school kids and even younger involved in robotics. So we do those things, direct impact to NASA missions. If you look at robotics on Mars and robotics throughout the solar system with satellites and orbiters of other planets. So I think there's a lot that NASA does, and we need to continue to do for STEM.
Yeah, I don't know what it is about material science, but we have been able to attract more women. Structural engineering may not have been something that immediately appealed to them, but certainly we attracted them into aviation. But we're having more success on the material science side, and I don't know if that's a marriage of chemical engineering and other things, but I think we should figure out how to put this challenge to, as you said, the youngest of Americans as they're thinking about these issues. And I don't know why this isn't a marriage of ideas, given that you're talking about, again, fuel efficiency, American jobs, leadership, all of these things that would come from this.
Right.
This is, it is as exciting as the other missions too. So thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Administrator Bridenstine, the ranking member mentioned space debris. So let's drill down on that just a little bit. Is the frequency of avoidance maneuvers increasing? Just a few days ago, NASA maneuvered the International Space Station to avoid a piece of unknown space debris. This has happened now 3 times this year. So is that increasing?
Yes, sir. It is. Now, I will tell you, so this year we've maneuvered the space station 3 times in order to avoid orbital debris. That has not happened since 2015. And now in this year, we've done it 3 times.
So is that just a coincidence?
I don't think that this is a coincidence. I will also say in the last 2 weeks, or maybe 3 weeks at this point, we have had 3 potential conjunctions that made us very nervous, apart from, and that's in the last 2 or 3 weeks, apart from the maneuver that we actually had to make. So
Close calls.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
We knew about them, but it was far enough away that you didn't have to maneuver.
Yes, sir. So we monitored them very closely, and we made a determination that it didn't require a maneuver.
What is the source of this debris?
So there's a lot of reasons for it. There's a lot of commercial activity in space right now, which we fully support. We've got to be able to use space for all of its benefits for humanity. And a lot of that commercial activity is launching, low Earth orbit remote sensing satellites, low Earth orbit communication satellites. Low Earth orbit is tremendously valuable for communications because it's low latency. And so the types of signals that you can use and the standards that you use are more like a cell phone technology. Whereas when you think about geostationary orbit, which is very far from Earth, you have to use different protocols. So low Earth orbit is where all of these constellations want to be. The challenge is we don't have, as a nation or even as a world, a robust architecture for how we're going to integrate all of these capabilities into this small space. And it's becoming more and more of a problem. The president
It's,
signed.
it's not a small space, but it's a finite.
It is. It is. And the challenge is the probabilities of impact are measured based on the amount of data that we receive. The probabilities of impact are measured in, 1 in 1,000 chances, 1 in 5,000 chances, 1 in 10,000 chances. And for us as an agency with the International Space Station, which is a $100 billion investment, we take those probabilities and we say, okay, we need to maneuver. But
Okay,
if
are these functioning objects or are they junk?
Both.
When I hear debris, I think of something left over from something in the past.
Yes, sir. So this object that we had to maneuver for just a few days ago is unidentified. We don't know what it is. We don't know where it came from. It is not something that is operated by anyone. It's junk. It is literally junk in space. Now, there are also satellites that have become debris because they just came to the end of their useful lives, and they don't deorbit themselves. They will over a number of years, but they're still there now. And then we also have just a lot more activity from our international friends, if you will, and they don't necessarily all follow the debris mitigation guidelines established by NASA and supported by the U.S. government.
So there's no international protocol yet on space debris.
What we have is international guidelines that NASA creates, the U.S. government adopts, and then those get adopted, at the UN and other places. The question is, what are we doing to make sure that people adhere to those guidelines? Anybody can say they follow them, but the question is, how do you follow up and make sure that they actually are? And how do you prove that they're not if they're not?
So there are guidelines that have been developed by the United States and have been adopted by the United Nations.
Yes, and in
Do
fact,
individual countries then need to sign on? Is that ideal?
well, yes. I mean, it's better that they sign on than not sign on. But a lot of countries sign on and then they don't fully adhere to those principles.
Okay, well, just one other thing, and then I'll recognize Senator Gardner, who's in the queue. The Department of Commerce intends to or has taken over the Space Situational Awareness Mission for civil and commercial entities. Do you support that, and how would authorizing the Office of Space Commerce to take over this function from DOD be helpful?
A couple of things. Right now, you have the Department of Defense that is responsible for fighting and winning wars in space now with the Space Force and U.S. Space Command. The challenge is we are having them at the Combined Space Operations Center. We're having them operate as though they are the FAA for space. So they're doing conjunction analysis and warning for all of the commercial activities in space. They're doing it for all of the international activities in space. And all of those international and commercial folks that are using that facility, that capability, they're not paying for it. So we're providing basically global space situational awareness and space traffic management to the world for free. In order to relieve them of that duty, we need to have, this is just, think about the 1950s. We had the Department of Defense responsible for air traffic control throughout the nation. Now, it wasn't as crowded back then, but there came a time in 1958 when President Eisenhower said, we're done with this because there were too many mid-air collisions. He said, we're done with this. We need a civilian agency that can do this activity. We are now there for space right now. So we need to take the unclassified data from the Combined Space Operations Center. We need to flow that to the Department of Commerce, and we need to combine that data with commercial data. It's all about data. It's about quantity and quality of data. We need to take that data, combine it with commercial and international data to create a single integrated space picture that can be shared with the world. And by the way, the world needs to support us in that effort. So if we're doing space situational awareness and space traffic management, the rest of the world is not, that creates a big problem.
Is there broad consensus within the administration for this move?
Yes, sir, 100%.
And it's being done administratively, I understand.
Well, when you say administratively, right now these activities are being done by the Department of Defense. The challenge right now is the Department of Commerce, under an executive order, basically a Space Policy Directive 3 from the President, the Department of Commerce should be picking up these missions. But they don't have the authorities provided by Congress at this point, nor do they have the appropriations provided by Congress. And so we're kind of in limbo right now. But
so you need the appropriators to address this issue, and hopefully late in the year or early next year, and this needs to be a provision in the next authorization bill. Is that correct?
I would be very supportive of that.
Thank you very much. Senator Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Administrator Bridenstine, for your service and all the work that you do for NASA and our aerospace companies in Colorado and beyond. It's imperative that we preserve America's leadership and innovation in science, particularly in space. We certainly know our adversaries are working very diligently to undermine our leadership, and our space programs obviously continue to be the envy of the world. And nations like China and others are trying to steal our ingenuity and displace U.S. leadership. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record a CNBC Global CFO Council article dated March 1st, 2019, entitled 1 in 5 corporations say China has stolen their IP within the last year. I would also like to enter a May 12, 2020 Space News article entitled Space Force Vice Commander. China can't be allowed to buy bankrupt U.S. space companies, which highlights concerns raised by Lieutenant General David Thompson regarding how Chinese interests may seek to invest in companies being squeezed by the COVID-19 pandemic. Finally, I would like to enter into the record a Reuters article dated September 15th entitled Exclusive, White House asks U.S. agencies to detail all China-related funding, which outlines a request by the Office of Management and Budget to understand how funding may be aiding China in unintended ways. Look, we know that Chinese actors are stealing intellectual property from American businesses. We know that they are using their corporate social credit system in a very worrisome way, and that many of the criteria of this system envisions that it could be used to require the transfer of technology or make it easier for Chinese interests to steal American intellectual property. A report from the Commission on Theft of American Intellectual Property estimates that China steals up to $600 billion worth of American intellectual property every year. To put that into perspective, every single year, China is stealing property from the United States worth nearly 3 times the size of the entire GDP of the nation of Portugal. That theft is enabled in part through China's internet security law, which was implemented back in 2017, which allows them to review sensitive company information that puts IP and human rights equally at risk. But it's not just this misguided law or China's unyielding quest to upend freedoms of all kinds around the globe. Without someone to step in and stop them, China thinks they'll get away with this kind of behavior. Administrator Bridenstine, do you agree that China has a clear history of stealing intellectual property?
Senator Gardner, you asked for 3 items to be admitted into the record.
Yes,
without objection, that will be done. Now ask your question.
Administrator Bridenstine, do you agree that China has a clear history of stealing American intellectual property?
There is no question.
And on the Reuters story that the chairman kindly entered into the record there regarding OMB's request to federal agencies, I'd like to share a quote from the article which reads, a spokesman for OMB confirmed that agency effort, telling Reuters that to ensure the U.S. remains strong and in a position of strength against rival nations like China, OMB has asked federal agencies for all funding meant to counter China or which could aid China. Do you share the White House's concern and belief that we should be taking a hard look at how our efforts at the federal level could be benefiting China?
Yes.
Do you agree we should be concerned with potential Chinese interests seeking to invest in U.S. companies and what that could mean to our economic and national security?
Yes.
Given your answers to those questions, do you agree it only makes sense for NASA to consider Chinese investment as part of its contracting process?
Yes. I think the answer is absolutely 100% yes. And just so you know, we're grateful for your leadership on this. I can tell you're very passionate. I would also say how that's done really matters to NASA. What we have to do as an agency is make sure that we don't put ourselves in the role of CFIUS, or we don't put ourselves in the role of the Department of Justice or the FBI. We have to be really careful that we do the things that we are good at, like getting to the moon and onto Mars. We have to be careful about how, 100% agree with everything you just said, but we're not really an investigative agency, so we need to be careful about how we go about doing this.
Well, I just want to make sure that we are investigating Chinese investments into U.S. aerospace companies and making sure that we're treating NASA as important to this issue as we are TikTok with Chinese investments and concerns. I would think that our aerospace, national security, space interest, Space Force, Space Command, and NASA are equally important
Yes,
that
sir.
we give the attention to that with China in regards to China as we do to TikTok with China. So, Administrator Bridenstine, thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Gardner. Let me say, there are no other senators in line. I have another question, but I know a number of offices are listening, and if members of the committee intend to ask questions, they should let us know, because if not, this may be the last round of questioning. Mr. Administrator, let's talk about the Enhanced Upper Stage, EUS, or Block B. The Enhanced Upper Stage will allow NASA to make full use of the SLS. I'm concerned that the budget request defers funding to develop this. How necessary is this, and what suggestion do you have for the Senate and the House?
Yes, sir. So, to start, because Congress and the Senate have fully funded all of our activities for the exploration upper stage, just so you know, those activities are underway, and we are getting to the point now where we've got key decision point C, or critical design review right in front of us. So all of this to say that
we're talking enhanced upper stage.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Well, it's EUS. Some people call it enhanced. Some people call it exploration upper stage. But we're talking about the same thing.
Okay, good. Just want to make clear.
And so, to the extent that we have an exploration upper stage or an enhanced upper stage, that would be gratefully beneficial to the agency, and we can use it. And so, so that's important to note. It is also true that when we go to the moon by 2024 with Artemis 3, we're going to be going with what's called an interim cryogenic propulsion stage, ICPS. That ICPS is already, it's a system that is in place that we can use and will get us to the moon by 2024. When we think about what happens beyond that, depending on if the Senate and the House make it available to us, we can certainly use the exploration upper stage or the enhanced upper stage. At this point, we think that there are opportunities to use commercial vehicles potentially in the future, but of course, all options are should be considered.
Thank you. Senator Udall is next.
Chairman, you got me there?
We can hear you. We can hear you well.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the recognition, and let me welcome the administrator here. I remember having a good conversation with him when he came through, so good to see you. Satellite servicing and debris removal will become an increasingly important part of space operations as low Earth orbit and other heavily populated orbits become increasingly congested by small satellites. Last October, I introduced Senate Resolution 386, a resolution supporting improvements in space situational awareness and advances in technology, and calling for international cooperation to address the increasing dangers of space debris. Do you support the kind of improvements to and advancements in situational awareness technology called for in my resolution?
Yes, sir. Without question, the challenge that we have as an agency, not as an agency, but as a federal government, is data. And so we need the ability to get as much information on the debris that is in low Earth orbit as possible to keep our mission safe. Yes, sir. We need new, more, and better technology and data.
Appreciate that answer. How important is it to ensure international cooperation on this issue and implement the 21 guidelines for space sustainability agreed to by the United Nations Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space?
So without international support, we end up, not getting the results that we're going to need. So without question, the United States of America is the preeminent space nation, but others are very rapidly developing and deploying space assets and creating debris that needs to be dealt with. So I'm very supportive of international agreements that mitigate the debris, and of course international agreements that enable us to see and respond to the debris as well.
Thank you for that answer. New Mexico's space industry is growing rapidly. Companies such as Virgin Galactic, Spin Launch, and Up Aerospace call New Mexico home. And I'm glad to hear that NASA is beginning to partner with some of these commercial spaceflight companies as well as others. Besides using these commercial space entities to eventually take individuals to the International Space Station and conduct other training for NASA personnel, is this an opportunity for NASA to increase other experiments and tests conducted from places like Spaceport America in New Mexico? And if so, what sort of experiments and testing would NASA conduct?
Yes, sir. We do these activities through what we call the Flight Opportunities Program, which is resident in the Space Technology Mission Directorate at NASA. That Flight Opportunities Program has already conducted, I think it's over 700 different experiments and technology demonstrations using commercial suborbital vehicles, everything from vertical takeoff and landing, using rockets to horizontal takeoff and landing using rockets, but also high altitude balloons. And so we've done hundreds of these kind of experiments, and there are huge opportunities in front of us. So the value is, if you're trying to get access to microgravity, there's really only a couple of ways to do it. One is, a drop tower. You drop something, from the top of a building, and you've got a second or two of microgravity. After that, we have parabolic flight, where you take an airplane and you put it on a parabolic trajectory, and you can get 20 to 30 seconds of microgravity. After that, you have to fly all the way to the International Space Station, which is, tens of millions of dollars, and of course, very, very challenging. It takes years of training, for example. But that commercial suborbital capability that you just mentioned gives us a great opportunity to do experiments for 5 or 10 minutes in microgravity, which is a lot more than the 20 or 30 seconds we can get from parabolic flight. What does that mean? We can test things. You asked what kind of things we could test. Well, right now we've been using it to prove that we can do 3D printing in microgravity, which is very difficult, but it can be done, and we're proving that we can create the technologies capable of doing that. 3D printing is hugely valuable when you do space flight, because you want to take as few things as possible, but be able to make things in space. We think about cryogenic management. How do fluids move in a microgravity kind of environment? So we use these kind of 5 or 10 minute flights for those types of activities. Fluids are critically important to space flight, and different fluids operate very differently in microgravity, and understanding that is necessary as we progress in our missions. And not having to fly those kind of experiments all the way to the International Space Station is hugely valuable to the taxpayer of the United States of America. There are other experiments that we do. We're looking at, in fact, right now, for the first time, one of my initial initiatives as the NASA administrator was, what about human-tended payloads? A lot of these experiments are conducted by university researchers or private institutions, and some of them wanted human-tended payloads. Well, we now have an opportunity to accept human-tended payloads. Wouldn't be NASA astronauts, but they would be commercial, suborbital scientists or researchers that can fly on these commercial vehicles funded by NASA. So that's a huge development that we've just put forward, and I think eventually we're going to be able to use these vehicles to in fact fly American astronauts as well for training and experiments and other capabilities. So I really think, Senator Udall, there is a great future here with commercial suborbital vehicles.
Thank you, Senator
Thank you,
Udall.
Mr. Administrator, for that excellent answer, and good to see the good work you're doing over there at NASA. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
I think the bipartisan sentiment expressed by Senator Udall is widely shared. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Administrator Bridenstine, it's nice to see you again, however remotely. I really enjoyed your visit to West Virginia when we renamed the IV&B Center for West Virginia's own Katherine Johnson. She's since passed away since we met, and she was quite a pioneer. So the 700 jobs across the state that NASA has and the millions of dollars of economic output of NASA, it was really great partnerships all throughout our state, particularly in the regions that we were in. I'd like to ask a quick question. It's more on the appropriations side. I support that NASA leveraging innovation and investment that you all bring about, but it seems that NASA's plan to develop a moon lander differs from the usual contracting approach that NASA has taken and has used on development of other major programs and spacecraft. I wonder if you could talk about that. Have you found it beneficial, and how is that rolled out?
Yes, ma'am. It's a critically important question. When we think about the successes that we have had with the Commercial Crew Program, for example, which we just saw, we launched our American astronauts on a commercial vehicle, which was fantastic. The goal that we have in that activity, as well as commercial resupply of the International Space Station, the goal that we have is ultimately for NASA to be one customer of many customers in a very robust commercial marketplace for human activities in low Earth orbit. But also, we want to have numerous suppliers that are competing against each other on cost and on innovation and on safety. And we have achieved that with commercial resupply, now commercial crew. We also want to start now commercial habitation, so commercial space stations themselves. So this is kind of the progression. The question that we had to answer was, given all of the programs that NASA has had in its history, if we're going to go to the moon as quickly as possible, how do we want to organize our efforts? And the decision that we made was we're going to model this after commercial resupply and commercial crew. And so we said we're going to partner with commercial industry to go sustainably to the moon, again, with the intent that they get customers, maybe not initially, but eventually, that are not NASA, and where they're competing against each other on cost and innovation and on safety. And if we can do that, we can drive down costs, we can increase access, we can have sustainability at the moon, which the Apollo program never delivered on. And that's ultimately our goal. Our goal is to figure out how do we have a program where we go to the moon and stay. And that commercial capability is ultimately what we think is a big part of that success that we're going to see in the future.
So in the initial, in the phase at which you're in right now, are you finding that there are those private and commercial entities that want to join this space, that there's enough to provide for competition? Or is this something that maybe our educational institutions and other private businesses could be developing towards? What are you finding in that space?
So right now, ma'am, we had initially, when we did this program to start, we had 5 proposals, and a number of those proposals had large capital investments behind them from the private sector already. So I think that there is lots of capability here already. We have selected 3 of those 5 proposals, and of course we're grateful for the funding that we got from the House and the Senate for what we call the base period. So now we've got 3 commercial lunar landers under development right now in the base period, which ends in February of 2021. And then from that point in February, we're going to make a determination whether or not there's 1, 2, or even 3 of those companies that we believe can get to the moon as soon as 2024. And so I would say, yes, ma'am, we've had a lot of support from private industry for this activity.
Good, good. I introduced with Senator Sinema the 21st Century Space Grant Modernization Act, which is included in the reauthorization that we passed. And I think you and I have talked about how the space grant program really benefits people all across this country. Have you had any stops and starts during the COVID era with this? Are you still processing the proposals in a timely fashion? And what's the status of that program?
So as of right now, ma'am, we're okay, but it's going to be more challenging as time goes on for sure. So we provide grants to universities for them to deliver on specific tasking. And of course, universities are having challenges delivering on that tasking, the same as NASA. When we do things at our centers, if we have an outbreak at a center, our people can't go to work any more than the people at a university can go to work. So this is a nationwide challenge that we're going to have to deal with. So there is a day in the future when we're going to have to make tough decisions, and those decisions are going to be maybe we don't start a new project and we use the funding that we receive for the continuation of the projects that have fallen behind, or we're going to have to come back to the House and the Senate and request additional appropriations in order to do the new starts. So I want to be clear. There is an impact from COVID. We've been successful as an agency moving forward with missions that we call essential, and now we're opening up very rapidly missions that we call mission critical functions, which would have an impact to the agency, but they're not quite as high of an urgency as mission essential functions. But there will be an impact for a lot of missions that are not in those 2 categories, and a lot of those early technology readiness level capabilities that universities are involved in are going to see challenges.
Thank you. Thank you. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Capito. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Administrator Bridenstine. Good to have you here and hear your testimony. Congress just recently passed a bipartisan Pro-SWIFT Act that I authored with Senator Gardner to better predict and mitigate threats of geomagnetic storms and other space weather. And if the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us anything, that we need to be prepared for disruptions that can upend our economy and in a significant way. And Administrator, I know that you were the author of a similar bill when you were serving in the House, so I know you can talk quite a bit about this topic. And just like to get your sense of your concern about impacts of space weather and what they can have on everyday lives and the significant threat that they pose, and why this legislation is important, why you authored it in the House, and now that it's passed into law, what can we expect?
Yes, sir. Senator Peters, you and Senator Gardner should be absolutely commended for leading on this issue. I was happy to support it in the House when I was there, but certainly without your leadership, it would not have happened. And working on it for all of these years from 2015, finally getting it done, I know that wasn't easy. But this is going to have huge impacts for America's human spaceflight capability. We think about the Artemis program and going to the moon. We're building a space station called Gateway. It's a small space station around the moon in order to enable the reusability of human landers. But we think about Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong on the surface of the moon in the 1969. Had they been there longer than they would have been hit with a solar flare from the sun. And that would have damaged them, and in fact could have very well ended their lives early. But we didn't know that back then. Now we do know that. So understanding the sun, the solar winds, solar radiation, we think about coronal mass ejections and solar flares. These are things that we have to understand very well if we're going to have a sustainable presence beyond the Van Allen radiation belts. And that's our goal. We want to explore space. And this bill is going to go a long ways to enabling us to have the early warning that we need and to be able to do the research necessary to even predict, to warn people based on the prediction, not just the detection of those kind of activities.
As the ranking member of the Armed Services Emerging Threats Subcommittee, I was pleased to see in the Memorandum of Understanding announced last week that General Raymond and the Space Force that had highlighted the importance of completing the survey of near-Earth objects. These hazardous objects impact the Earth, as you know, and pose a threat to our safety, security, and to our military. The NASA Reauthorization Act of 2019 includes an amendment that I authored to direct the Secretary of Defense to support NASA's work in the area. And the importance of this was highlighted with the discovery of Comet Neowise earlier this year, which was previously unknown and likely came from some other star system. Can you talk briefly about the importance of completing the survey of hazardous objects, something that Americans consistently list as a top priority for NASA, and how the Department of Defense can help, particularly with respect to the deployment of a new space-based telescope to better track these threats?
Yes, sir. Again, critically important to the nation and the world, in fact. You know, I've often said, and others have said, you know, the dinosaurs didn't have a space program, and it didn't help them. So we think back to 2013 was my first year in the House of Representatives, and we saw the Chelyabinsk incident where we had this asteroid come in and explode over Russia, and while it didn't kill anybody that we know of, it resulted in over 1,000 people going to the hospital and broken windows and damaged buildings. That was an asteroid. I don't remember how big it was, but it was on the something like 30 meters big in diameter. So we think about that incident, and then we think about how those incidents happen throughout history. There have been other incidents. So in the early 1900s, there was an incident that took out like 800 square miles in Russia, for example. So yes, we need to be able to detect these objects. We need to make sure that we do have a near-Earth object surveillance mission. Partnering with the United States Space Force, we're doing that already with the Space Surveillance Telescope down in Australia. NASA and partnered with at the time it was Air Force Space Command, to put our own algorithms into their mission. Their mission, of course, is to detect nefarious activities in space. Our mission is to look for bolides in space. But we put our algorithms into their space telescope. It's now in Australia, delivering great work for the Air Force or Space Force now, and we, as an agency, get to detect bolides. So that's a great partnership, and extending that partnership into new domains we would be very supportive of that.
Great. Thank you for your testimony. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Senator Thune.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Bridenstine, welcome
Sir.
to the committee. Did you make your annual trek to South Dakota?
I have not. COVID might have gotten in the way of that one, but there will be another day.
Good. Well, you're a little busy, and we appreciate that. The global space economy has greatly expanded over the last 10 years, meaning that United States leadership in space is more critical now than ever before. And I think, as you know, we have lots of discussions around here about allocation of tax dollars, how to get the best return, whether or not investments in some areas make sense. So could you describe how the American taxpayer stands to benefit from continued investment in NASA missions and programs, and what this investment means for job growth, technological advancement, and economic prosperity in the United States?
Yes, sir. So I'll just start with maybe a little history here. When we think about the Apollo program, a lot of people didn't really know what was going to materialize from the Apollo program. But right now we're having a hearing, and these cameras are on, and people are watching all over the country using DirecTV or Dish Network or internet broadband from space. They might be listening to it on the radio with XM radio. So these are communication capabilities born from this little agency called NASA, all tied to that early NASA era. We think about how we navigate with GPS and how that has fundamentally transformed the American economy. We think about precision agriculture, critically important to South Dakota, for example. We're using space assets right now in order to sense the Earth in every part of the electromagnetic spectrum and make determinations as to how can we increase crop yields while reducing water usage by as much as 25%. And so that's going to feed more of the world than ever before. So it's how we produce food, how we produce energy cleanly, so that pipelines, we can detect leaks early, shut those leaks down for greenhouse gases, so that energy companies don't get fined by the EPA, for example. So NASA is playing a role there. The way we do disaster relief is dependent on a lot of these technologies that NASA has developed. We don't do disaster relief, but we have developed these technologies that have now been commercialized that the government benefits from. We think about how we predict weather, how we understand climate and how it's changing. And of course, national security and defense, so many capabilities that NASA initiated have been utilized by the Department of Defense, and vice versa. If you go back in time, it was intercontinental ballistic missiles that first launched, for example, Alan Shepard to space. So I think these technology development programs have demonstrated that we really don't know at the end of the day where all of it goes, but we know this: the return on investment is huge. Now, those are things that really can't measure. But I hear a lot as the NASA administrator, I hear about Tang and Velcro, for example, because of the Apollo program and how those were, I guess, very nostalgic kind of capabilities that were promoted in the Apollo era. But it goes so far beyond that. But we did an economic impact study because I wanted to understand what is the impact. And disregarding everything I just mentioned, just the direct economic impact to the United States for the year 2019 was $64 billion. And it was 312,000 jobs in the United States of America, directly impacted from NASA investments and capabilities. So all of that, I think, is tremendously valuable. And I think if you want to get a very specific return on investment, it's hard to measure that. Just we've been working remotely, and I use this little camera that's in my cell phone. That camera was developed for a Mars mission in the 1990s, and then it was licensed by Nokia, for example, and put into a phone. And all of a sudden now everybody on the globe has these cell phones with cameras in them that are used to communicate all over the world. And of course, that's been proven to be very valuable during the COVID era especially. So I think the return that we get from NASA is overwhelming and well worth. Sir, I think maybe sometimes it's missed by the public that we as an agency get about 1/3 of 1% of the federal budget, like less than half of 1% of the federal budget. And the return on that has been just astonishing.
Yeah, indeed, and that's a long and a very good list, and one that probably, I'm guessing a lot of us sometimes don't appreciate just how much impact that's had. Very quickly, could you share any updates on the development of optical communications technologies at NASA and the potential of these innovations to improve the NASA missions in low Earth orbit and beyond?
Yes, sir. So optical communications, basically you get a very high frequency, which means you can pack a lot more data. So you get very high data rates. And optical communications, the spectrum is very narrow, and so you're able to prevent jamming in ways that you can't do with radio communications. And you can actually communicate from a lot further away with larger data rates. So it focuses the energy specifically where you want the energy to go. For example, when we communicate from Mars with a high aperture antenna, it's hitting the entire Earth, and a lot of the signal isn't hitting the Earth at all, which is just wasted energy. But if you can put it into optical communications and narrowly focus it, you can target not just the Earth, but you can target a very specific point on the Earth. Maybe an area the size of the state of South Dakota, for example. So optical communications have tremendously valuable impacts. Right now, we're partnering with the Space Force to do a laser communication technology demonstrator that they're going to fly on our behalf. And we're going to use that kind of technology to communicate the great data and information that we get in future missions to Mars or other places in the solar system.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Thune. Senator Sinema.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our administrator for testifying today. NASA partners with universities, and those partnerships provide significant benefits both to NASA and to the universities. All three Arizona public universities, the University of Arizona, Arizona State University, and Northern Arizona University, provide students with hands-on STEM education and research opportunities thanks to the Space Grant Program and other NASA partnerships. For example, the University of Arizona is a leader on the OSIRIS-REx mission, which will bring the first asteroid sample to Earth. And at ASU, the Psyche mission marks the first time a university has led a deep space NASA mission. Once the spacecraft launches in 2023 and arrives at the asteroid in 2030, the Psyche ASU team will be the first scientists to study an asteroid which is remarkably similar to a planetary core. In the past, Administrator, you've testified to this committee that university-led missions are more likely to be on schedule and under budget. I appreciate your continued support for these valuable NASA-university partnerships. But just last week, I learned of some potential changes to the near-Earth object surveillance mission at the University of Arizona, and that raises some important questions. As you know, in 2005, Congress required NASA to discover 90% of near-Earth objects 140 meters and larger by 2020. The University of Arizona's Dr. Amy Mainzer has been a leader on this issue for years and has led the precursor projects in this area. 3 months ago, NASA approved an organizational plan that put Dr. Mainzer in the role of survey director for the surveillance mission. But last week, without any consultation, NASA decided to remove her from the survey director role and transfer the mission leadership to NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory Center. Could you explain this decision to transfer the mission leadership?
Yes. So thank you for the question, Senator Sinema. And I will say that I have been briefed on this. I can tell you that we are 100% committed to the NEO surveillance mission, and I can also tell you that Dr. Amy Mainzer is somebody that NASA highly regards, and she's in the lead on this project, and she will be in the lead on this project. Period. That's going to happen. I will also say that I think the issue here was a communication error, and I would also say that Dr. Zurbuchen. I know Dr. Zurbuchen has been working this issue. He's the head of the Science Mission Directorate at NASA. I'll tell you, he is 100% committed to this mission and making sure that we get this organizational structure right. But I think this has. I want to be really careful what I say here, but I think this issue has been resolved, and I think it has been resolved in a way that is very favorable to all parties. And just know that we want to make sure that we're getting this done right. And I will make sure that Dr. Zurbuchen is in communications with your office regularly on this issue.
I appreciate that very much, Administrator. We have not heard any information since last week clarifying this change. And of course, as you can imagine, we in Arizona are very interested in ensuring that the University of Arizona and Dr. Mainzer retain this position in this very important mission in partnership with NASA. So I'll move on to my next question. Some at NASA have said that directed missions need to be led out of NASA centers and not universities. Now, we know that's not a statutory requirement, and it appears to be inconsistent with the evidence that university-led missions, such as OSIRIS-REx, have proven to be cost-effective. Can you talk a little about your position? Should directed missions be led out of a NASA center, or is university-led appropriate?
I think there's a lot of opportunities to have these missions led by universities. I think the two that you highlighted are perfect examples of missions that have been very successful from universities, and these are not small missions. We're talking about OSIRIS-REx, which for the first time, we've never been able to orbit an object like OSIRIS-REx is now orbiting. It's an asteroid in deep space called Bennu, and in fact, we're going to do for the first time in American history, in October, we're going to go down and we're going to grab some material from Bennu for the first time ever and bring that back to Earth. So an asteroid return mission, and that mission, of course, is led by the University of Arizona. And then, of course, you mentioned Psyche, which is in the asteroid belt on the other side of Mars, in front of Jupiter, but a huge steel ball that is likely to be a planetary core that came apart at some point in history. We've never been able to study a planetary core before, and now we're going to be able to do it. And it's led by Arizona State University. These two missions, I think, are perfect examples of what can happen when you have the university lead. And I know you're very well aware of this and you're a champion of it, but when a university leads, you get the scientists and the engineers that are sitting side by side and making determinations. So NASA comes in and we say, hey, here's the budget and here's the schedule. What can you do? The universities propose, and other nonprofit kind of research institutes, they propose. When NASA selects a university, you get the scientists and the engineers, and they are forced to make trades early in the process. And because of those trades, they're able to keep schedule and they're able to keep budget. So the engineer says, well, we're not going to be able to achieve this. What if we did this instead? And the scientist can say, well, that will result in our ability to collect this science instead of that science and evaluate it this way instead of that way. And those trades made early in the process result in schedule and budget actually being maintained. And even better is that students get involved. And so graduate students, even undergraduate students. So it's really it's government, it's academia, and it's students that come together, make it happen, and keeps cost and schedule. And then you have students that are graduating with hands-on experience that is tremendously valuable for our agency and our partners that help us develop capability. So I'm a huge advocate of enabling universities as much as possible.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Administrator Bridenstine. And thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Senator Sinema. Senator Sullivan is next.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Administrator Bridenstine. Thank you for your testimony. One of the things that I wanted, and you and I have talked about this quite a lot, but NASA's history of inspiring Americans, particularly young Americans. And, with the 50th anniversary of the Apollo mission last year, I think, which had a lot of inspirational moments. I think you've read this book. You and I have talked about this, American Moonshot, which is a great book by Douglas Brinkley on the Apollo missions. I actually think that with the work you're doing right now, the Artemis program, the work that other agencies, not other agencies, but companies like SpaceX and others are doing, it's an incredible moment of the next generation to be inspired, young Americans to work for you, to get involved in this mission, to get involved in the vision. You were just talking to Senator Sinema about your collaboration with universities. I've raised the issue of the movie The Martian a couple times, one of my favorite movies in part because it's so inspiring for young people. Can you tell me in a little bit more detail what you are doing to kind of really inspire the next generation of Americans, young Americans, who we can rely on for their science and technology expertise to really get them not only involved, but leading on the next exciting phases of NASA's mission?
Yes, sir. So I will tell you the biggest thing that we can do as an agency to inspire that next generation that you talk about is we have to do stunning achievements. And as you identified, that's really what the American Moonshot was all about in the 1960s, and that's what the Artemis program is all about today. So when we think back to the 1960s, if you walk around people at NASA today and you ask them what made you get involved in the space business, the ones who are old enough will tell you that they can tell you exactly where they were when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were walking on the moon. And of course, we did 5 moon missions after that. Every single one of them was impressive and inspiring, and that got that generation inspired to do space. I'll tell you, my generation, we were inspired by the space shuttles. I remember the first space shuttle launch. I was in kindergarten, and then we think about some of the setbacks that we saw with the shuttles, the Challenger in Columbia, and my generation, we remember exactly where we were when those events happened. And I will also tell you that
sorry to interrupt, but can I just ask you, what is NASA doing?
Yes, sir.
Right now to help get the word out? Are you going to campuses? Are you recruiting? Are you collaborating with Hollywood? I mean,
yes.
what are you doing right now to actively get, because I think we're at this moment. It's very exciting. And I think that the young people that I talk to see this as a great opportunity. But what are you doing exactly with some specifics to reach out, make them understand, and really get to a point where we can inspire a next generation of Americans to lead on these really important issues, and of course would have all kinds of knockoff effects that are positive for our country, our society, like the Apollo missions had?
Absolutely, yes, sir. So we invest through the Science Mission Directorate into what's called FIRST Robotics, which gets young people involved in robotic capabilities. And of course, our agency is filled with people who were involved in FIRST Robotics when they were in high school or even before. We're engaging universities from the Space Grant and MUREP kind of opportunities. EPSCoR, for example. These are all things that enable us to reach into those younger folks and share with them what we're doing, but also get them engaged, directly engaged in the missions that we do. And of course, contracting with universities throughout the United States to do some of these big missions is actually very big as well. We started what's called the Lunar Surface Innovation Initiative, where we've partnered with, now I think it's about 130 institutions across the United States, using the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory. They are kind of the integrator of the program, where they're bringing all of these institutions across the United States, to include a lot of universities, together to create things like surface power on the moon and dust mitigation on the moon, and how we're going to maneuver, rove on the moon, these kind of things, habitation on the moon. So how we're going to use the resources of the moon to live and work for long periods of time. So we're engaging young people across the United States through those different programs. And then of course, we even have programs that reach into elementary and junior high schools through the Office of STEM Engagement at NASA. So we're doing what we can. You mentioned Hollywood. We're working to do private astronaut missions that might include some famous actors.
That there's opportunity here to really inspire. There's been some great movies that have that ability. So are you doing anything with them or other media types that can get the word out?
Absolutely. So we are creating a new program called Private Astronaut Missions, and we're working every day to make sure that people who are everyday people that want to go to space and do things, that we're making space available to them. Now, those private astronaut missions are going to come with a price tag. We're not flying people to space for free, but certainly there's a lot of interest there from Hollywood and others, and so we're going to leverage all of that capability.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan.
Thank you on that, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it, and if there's any other issues you want the Congress to work on you with that involves this issue of inspiring the next generation of Americans with the work that you're doing, let us know. I think it's a bipartisan issue here in the Senate that a lot of us want to get behind. So thank you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, sir, and you can count on it. We will. We'll call you.
Continued bipartisan enthusiasm about this subject matter. Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and you're absolutely right that there is bipartisan enthusiasm, and I'm pleased to be a supporter and very passionate supporter of space exploration. My recollection, perhaps reflecting my age, about the first space exploration by man was the Sputnik, which was a sign of American potential failure, and then, of course, a great recovery by this country, not without its mishaps and obstacles, but very, very inspiring in the end. And space has always inspired man. My fear is that the moment that a lot of young potential scientists and explorers may be seeing right now is their dad being laid off from an aerospace company or contracting coronavirus. On Earth here, we have a pandemic. And I'm concerned about the effects of that pandemic on our aerospace industry, about potentially losing a whole class of early career scientists and losing companies that are struggling. I see them in my state of Connecticut. And in particular, in the area of aeronautics, I note that the NASA investment in aeronautics is just 3% of the total budget. I wonder whether you think that's sufficient, given the important impact of aeronautics, not only on scientific development, but also, quite honestly, on jobs and economic progress. Connecticut is known as, at least we know ourselves as, the Aerospace Alley. We're very proud of our role in aeronautics and aerospace, and I'd like to know whether you think that that budget should be increased.
So I think a lot has changed in our country, as you have said, and we think about the coronavirus pandemic, we think about the challenges with MAX 8, and that has had a devastating effect on aeronautics in general. I do believe that at this point in American history, now is not the time to rest on our laurels, and I think there is room for additional support that we're going to need. This is a huge export for our country, which, as you identified, creates tons of jobs, and it offsets the trade deficit that we have around the world in a significant way. We saw when Boeing had its challenges with MAX 8, it impacted the GDP by about 0.5%. I mean, that's a huge impact because of aeronautics. So I think the lesson taken from that is that if we were to make the right investments, earlier Senator Cantwell asked me about a trust-braced wing. I think that's one investment that would be tremendously valuable. But I would also say, and this might be of interest to Connecticut, we need small core engines using advanced materials, higher pressure and temperature capabilities, because what we need out of our engines are higher bypass ratios for more fuel efficiency, fewer carbon emissions. Those are investments that we're investing in this budget. But I can also say that as we go forward, when we think about years in the future, it would be there are very few investments I can think of that would have a bigger impact for the American economy than sustaining our leadership in aeronautics.
So why not invest more? It's only 3% of your budget.
So I think we have a good investment for this budget for where we are right now. But I think as years go by, this is going to be an area that we're going to have to consider even more.
Will you commit to a larger investment, given that we are in competition with other nations as well?
I can commit to you that I will work towards that end.
Let me ask about a different area, the spacesuit program. As you know, on August 31st, the NASA Office of Inspector General notified the Congress of an impending audit examining NASA's management and development of the next generation space suits for the lunar missions and future deep space exploration. I have concerns about the issues with the current acquisition strategy for that next generation spacesuit and the potential effect that it could have on companies in Connecticut. As you well know, Connecticut is very deeply involved in spacesuit development and production. Should we be concerned that there are technical and schedule issues with the next generation spacesuit, and what are you doing about them?
Yes, sir. So the key, I think, on the spacesuit issue is when we go to the moon, it's, as you know, an entirely different spacesuit because you've got dust, you have to be able to walk. The spacesuit that we use on the moon is very different than the spacesuit we use to do spacewalks on the International Space Station. So what NASA is doing rapidly right now is developing that capability. And for the moon landing for Artemis 3, we're going to be developing that internally, but we're doing it with an intent and forethought to make sure that what we want to see in the future is all of the production capabilities of these spacesuits be transferred to the commercial sector. And I think that follows along with our goal when we talk about the human landing system being developed commercially. We want spacesuits developed commercially as well. So we're moving towards that very rapidly. If there are specific things that we can work on together, I'm happy to.
Well, I would like to work with you, but may I suggest that engaging the industry perhaps more positively and proactively might be useful as well.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Rosen.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Administrator Bridenstine, for your enthusiasm, your knowledge. You mentioned Tang a while ago. It brought back a lot of childhood memories for me, as my mom would put Tang on the breakfast table. That was really a big deal for us. And I'm glad that you also mentioned MURAP, because I want to talk about that too, women and minorities in research. So, of course, NASA, you have several programs to support states with space research and to help recruit and retain STEM students from underrepresented populations. As you know, NASA EPSCoR has a joint federal-state program designed to allow more states like Nevada to participate in space and aeronautics research. The Minority University Research Education Project, the one that you mentioned, MURAP, awards research grants to minority-serving institutions with the goal of diversifying NASA's workforce, as well as the larger STEM workforce. I'm proud to note, but for the first time in our state's history, a Nevadan was selected for a 3-year fellowship through the MURAP program. Alexandria Washington, a UNLV doctoral student, she's going to be working on a project to develop a robotic mobile platform that can traverse unique terrains like the kinds you're going to find perhaps on the moon and explore places humans cannot yet reach. However, despite the success of NASA, EPSCoR, MURAP, and other STEM education programs at NASA, the President's most recent budget request proposed terminating NASA's Office of STEM Engagement and proposed drastic cuts to funding EPSCoR and MURAP. So, Administrator Bridenstine, you're so passionate about these programs. Can you describe your familiarity, the work that MURAP and EPSCoR is doing, the importance of increasing our diversity in scientific research?
Yes, ma'am. So I will say that the folks at NASA that are involved in the MURAP program are doing amazing work, and of course it does in fact pay dividends. It is also true that what the budget request does is it focuses on the mission directorates and what they're trying to achieve as national goals, and it really focuses on those activities that will help us achieve those national goals. Now, I will be clear, if the Senate funds, as the Senate has in past years, the Office of STEM Engagement, we are going to move forward and we are going to execute, and those programs are going to serve NASA very well. But I also...
you still need the Office of STEM Engagement? Would you like to see us do that and see the President support that?
Well, I will tell you, it has been tremendously valuable. I would also tell you that I think there are other opportunities to fund those types of programs that would be more in alignment with NASA's missions. And that's really where the budget is focused. But I can definitely... Would you share
some of those with us?
Say that again?
Would you share some of those programs with us, your focus then, please?
Oh, sure. So, for example, when we think about contracting with universities, we initiated a program within the Aeronautics Mission Directorate, for example, that is a university leadership initiative where the Aeronautics Mission Directorate is partnering directly with minority universities to engage them in aeronautics activities, to include unmanned aerial systems and things like that have a direct impact to NASA's mission. We have other programs that we're doing through the Science Mission Directorate as it relates to robotics for going to the surface of the moon and other things. So I think we're all committed to achieving what you have highlighted is so important, which is creating that diversity for the workforce and creating that diversity for students, for opportunities. And I think I can very clearly say that we are committed to that agenda.
Well, I am concerned that you're trying to fold things into a one enterprise solution. And so moving forward, I really like to know how you plan to keep EPSCoR as a separate research enhancement program, not diluting its mission by folding it into other programs. And, you know, speaking about our budget, and if we scale it down, how are we going to then inspire those future generations, our space ambitions, going to Mars, going to other places, if we don't invest in the next generation of NASA innovators?
Yes, ma'am. I think we are 100% committed to investing in that next generation and doing those really amazing, stunning achievements, like the Artemis program, where we're going to take not just the next man, but the first woman to the surface of the moon. And I can tell you, nobody is more excited than that than my 12-year-old daughter. And so I think these are the kind of things that we're focused on and we want to move out on, and certainly engaging all along the way. MUREPs and other institutions that encourage that next generation to get involved in the STEM fields.
Thank you. I appreciate your service. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator Scott.
Thank you, Chairman Wicker. Thank you for hosting this, and I want to just thank Chairman Wicker for his commitment to NASA and space exploration. You've had a lot of years up here, and what I've watched over the years is you've had a significant commitment, and I know it's important to your home state. So thank you for that. As you know, NASA is pretty important to Florida, as it is to Mississippi and a few other states. I became governor back in 2010, and you know the space industry was in pretty bad shape then. We got I think we lost over 7,000 jobs in 2009 with the Obama cuts, and when they stopped manned flight. But since then, the federal government has been a good partner. The state, when I was governor, we put up a lot of money every year to get space exploration and bring it back, and now it's unbelievable what's going on there. And I just want to thank NASA for their commitment to using the private sector to do things. I think it was a big deal this summer to see the SpaceX launch, and so it was exciting to be there. I'm sure your 12-year-old daughter's excited. My 8-year-old grandson is committed to be the first man on Mars. He's very comfortable between that and being a paratrooper and a policeman. He told his mom he's picked jobs that are not dangerous. And he told me that it's not dangerous to go to space anymore.
Okay, well that means we're doing a good job.
Well, you've created. I think what you've done is you've done a good job of creating excitement for these young people, and I think that's going to pay off not just for the space industry, but just for STEM education in the country. So thanks for doing that.
Thank you, sir.
So what do you need that you don't have to continue the goal that I know that you have and the president have, and the Chairman Wicker has, to continue to explore space and to do it in a responsible manner?
Yes, sir. I think probably the biggest thing, and especially for the state of Florida, and I want to say the state of Florida it had benefited greatly when you were governor with the establishment of Space Florida and all of those commercial activities and your leadership on that. And now, the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral being this multi-user spaceport. So the vision there and the execution has been very helpful to us as an agency, and we're grateful for that. A couple of things that I think are important to note. We all know that the International Space Station is going to come to an end of its life at some point. It cannot last forever. And of course, it's been, in November, we're celebrating 20 years of a continually occupied space station. That's a long time and amazing. But we need to start making the investments for what comes next. And that what comes next is the commercialization of low Earth orbit. As you've seen, we've done commercial resupply. We've now done commercial crew, launching American astronauts from the Space Coast there in Florida. The next big thing is commercial space stations. All of those resupply missions and those commercial crew missions need a place to go. and if the International Space Station comes to the end of its life, and we don't have commercial space stations, there's going to be a lot of rockets that aren't going to get launched. And I think it's important that we fund our efforts as an agency for those commercial space stations. We've put that in the budget request in years past, and it hasn't gotten funded. That's critically important for the country. China is building their own, what they call the Chinese International Space Station. They're working very hard to attract our international partners, which we have helped build their capacity, and now they're going to potentially take that to China. We're working to prevent that from happening. But at the same time, it's important for us to think about the architecture that we need. We need commercial resupply, commercial crew, commercial habitats. NASA needs to be a customer there. We'll be a tenant customer. But we need to change the paradigm like we've done with launch vehicles. We need to change the paradigm for habitation in space. And then apply what we've learned within those programs to commercial access to the moon. We're happy and excited that in November of next year, we're going to launch the most powerful rocket that's ever been built. It's currently being tested at Stennis. We're going to get that rocket done.
Which state is that?
Yeah.
I wonder which state.
So without Mississippi, we can't get that rocket to Florida. And so it's an all of the above strategy. And certainly we're excited about launching that next year. So I would you asked what we need, and I'm making the best case I can that we need to start thinking about what happens next in low Earth orbit.
I know the chairman will be supportive of trying to do space exploration. Let me just finish by just asking or thanking you. You've been a real partner in the Visitor Center, and I think it does an unbelievable job of exciting families about what goes on in space. And so thanks for being a partner. I know they work really hard to try to do a great job and excite kids to want to explore space. So thank you for what you're doing.
It's an amazing place.
Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Scott, and thank you for that shout out for the Stennis Space Center in Mississippi. Administrator Bridenstine, you had a little bit of a rocky confirmation process.
I don't remember.
Before this committee. Well, I do. And let me just say that you have won over a number of skeptics, and I think the bipartisan support for the job you're doing has been indicated very profoundly today, and I appreciate the job you're doing. The drink Tang has been mentioned. Let me just say that every time you've come on the screen today, you have been an advertisement for Mountain Dew, and I think PepsiCo needs to make a great contribution to NASA based on all of the publicity that you've given them today. That said, the hearing record will remain open for 2 weeks. During this time, senators are asked to submit any questions for the record. Upon receipt, our distinguished witness is requested to submit his written answers to the committee as soon as possible.
Yes, sir.
So with that, we conclude the hearing and express our appreciation to Administrator Bridenstine.
Thank you, Chairman.
Is it cold enough for you in here?
Yeah, I was in the hot seat, so I like the cold. Thank you all so much. Thank you. I won't come and shake hands, but I appreciate it.
All right, it's good to see you.
Thank you, sir. Good to see you.
You're doing great. Thank
We're going to look forward to getting down to Mississippi.
I want to see that test if I can.
Yes, sir.
That'll be great.
Yep, we will make sure you're invited for sure. Thank you, guys.
We'll find
All right, okay, sounds good. We'll get you a front row seat.
Thanks, sir.
Yes, sir.